the head of development at the Green Party, and welcome to another Wednesday night live with the Green Party. We're so thrilled that you could join us. Those of you who are old hat and have been joining these conversations over the past several months know that what we're trying to do with these chats is invite members and also invite people who aren't members of the Green Party together to have conversations about green issues and about this big job of systems change. And we're trying to have conversations with people with a broad range of experiences, expertise, and ideas from academia or activism, from the business world, from NGOs, you name it, to come together to have conversations on specific topics that help us to all broaden our thinking. We really want to engage in a dialogue as much as we can do in this digital nature and have some debate. Debate is not always easy, but it's absolutely essential. So we're not asking everybody to agree with us. We don't necessarily agree with everybody who joins us, but it really does help to stimulate our thinking and to get us being creative. Why are we doing all of this? Of course, because we all believe fundamentally that better is possible, but we've got to figure out how to make it happen. So we're toying with the idea that better is possible when we build common ground more than battlegrounds, when we turn activism on our streets into legislation in our parliaments, when our economy starts to serve our environment and all of our well-being, when challenges are solved by the communities who face them. How do we empower that to happen? And when homes, our health, and our work are all seen as green issues. And so in these conversations, we're in particular going to be focusing on, okay, the big topic of systems change and how we stop having isolated conversations about issues and start holistically talking about how all of these things interconnect. Doesn't fit into a soundbite very well. So how do we get people's attention so we can have those conversations? This is politics and we tend to focus on competition, but if everything is connected and there's a really urgent space of time in which change must happen, how do we collaborate as well as compete to make that happen? That's hard work. How can we do it? And then participation in our democracy. Democracy isn't something that is done to us, or it shouldn't be. It should be something that we do. So how can we make sure that people have the information, that people are empowered within their communities to get active in democracy, and that is equal and open to absolutely everyone? How do we do that? How can we help people understand? A lot of people are political activists who've been engaged in this work for a long time, but politics has got a big P and a little p. All the decisions that we make on a daily basis are also political. So how can we translate that into greater participation in democracy? How do we foster that? So tonight in particular, we're going to have a conversation about leadership. If the Green Party has a radically different view for how our society, our government should be run, then we probably have a different idea of just the fundamental nature of leadership, what that means on an individual level and what that means in terms of the practice of leadership. This is a timely conversation because we've just had internal elections at the Green Party and we have elected our leaders, re-elected Jonathan Bartley and Sian Berry as co-leaders. Welcome, Jonathan and Sian. Hello. And re-elected Amelia Womack as our deputy leader. Hello, Amelia. And when we organized this event, we didn't know what the outcome of the elections were going to be. What we did know is that we really hoped that the event that we had on this platform on these Wednesday nights would give us an opportunity to get to know leaders as people, to give them an opportunity to talk to us as humans so we could better understand what motivates them to do this job. And in this really unpredictable world where hope can be difficult, what enables them to be resilient and how they want to be able to share what they've learned as leaders and through their new roles. So that's what we're here to discuss tonight. And that's also why we invited Giles Hutchins along. Hi, Giles, how you doing?
Hello, hello. Yeah, very good. Thank you very much for being here. It's a real honor to be here with you.
Thanks, Giles. Giles has worked in leadership for several years, and he's gone on a journey himself in his own life. And he is particularly focused on how to coach leaders to get in touch with what it means to be truly human and what they can learn from the natural world, and how they can foster practices of regeneration in their own lives and bring that to the people that they work with and bring that to their organizations. And so Giles is here to stimulate a little bit of debate and to just introduce some ideas to us that we can discuss, so we can have this broader conversation about leadership. So I think we've got over 200 people in the room tonight, so let's get started with the nitty-gritty of our event. We're going to try something different tonight. We're going to kickstart the night with a bit of audience participation. And what that means is we're going to try to build a word cloud together using a piece of software called Menti. My colleague Julie is going to manage you through this process. What we want you to do, we sent out a reminder email saying if you've got your mobiles handy, that would be great. So you can see in the chat what we're asking you to do is to go to a website, www.menti.com, and to type in the number 2377071. You'll see that in the chat. So www.menti.com, and type in the number 2377071. And we want to build a word cloud. And what we're going to ask you to type into Menti is, in one word, the most important leadership quality to you. What's the most important leadership quality to you? And Julie, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn over to you to start sharing your screen and to guide us through. Is that okay?
That's great. So if someone's still a bit unsure on what to do, it's in the chat box. You just go to menti.com and you put in 2377071. You can also use your laptop or tablet or whatever else, as long as you just put in the same link. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what people have been putting in. Holly, it seems like you have to share your screen since you're the host.
Oh, sorry. Now you can share it.
Amazing. Now, I hope everyone can see my screen. And I'm going to put it into large mode. There we go.
All right. Oh, good, great. Everybody seems like there's lots of participation here. Vision, integrity, empathy. I see listening, courage, honesty, compassion. Ooh, oh, level-headedness. That can be difficult sometimes under pressure. All right. So as the bubble is emerging, I'm going to ask our panelists tonight, is there, Jonathan, Sean, Amelia, is there a word that's emerging in this word cloud that is really meaningful to you, something that inspires you to want to share a story or some thoughts?
I feel challenged.
Yeah, on the spot. Jonathan, go for it.
Just reflecting on some of those words. Vision, I mean, it's sometimes it's hard to kind of share that vision. I think vision is important, but to have that collective vision is really important. I don't know if it necessarily comes from one person. It's something that maybe should be co-created, particularly in the Green Party. I guess for me, and it's not in there, but I think I tapped it in, was openness and vulnerability. Those are two things that I feel are really important in leadership. And it's something I try to aspire to, but find it very challenging to do so, because it does leave yourself very open to attack. And in our kind of very adversarial political culture, both, being honest, inside the party and outside the party, we don't have a kind of system, a culture, which makes it easy to be open and vulnerable. But I think they are really crucial qualities in a leader.
And they can be frightening too, can't they, to be open and vulnerable, particularly when you're on a stage and people are looking at you to lead, but it's important, isn't it? Amelia or Sean, was there anything that jumped out to you that you wanted to share?
Just building on what Jonathan said, actually, because the word that bounced out to me, which has disappeared down the priorities a bit, was compassion and compassionate. And I think certainly being a younger woman in politics, compassion is sometimes used as a negative thing on the political agenda, as if it's some kind of weakness. Whereas I really feel that as Greens and as leaders, our compassion is what gives us strength. I remember being on panels where talking about needing to end nuclear weapons, and another panelist from another political party saying, of course, Amelia would think that because she's a woman. As if having compassion for other people, as if trying to stop a nuclear apocalypse is something that is weak or there's something lacking in a way. Yet when we've seen in New Zealand and other places around the world, it's when politicians are compassionate that people really relate and buy into what is possible in the political agenda, that people aren't just fighting for their own voices, but are actually representing the people they claim to represent. And I think, to me, that makes it so powerful, and something that I know that as a leadership team, we really embody.
Thanks so much, Amelia. And then, Sean, I definitely want to give you the opportunity to speak as well. Does anything jump out?
We're all watching the thing, the words whizzing by,
Yeah.
aren't we?
It's transfixing, yeah.
I think what's really interesting here to me is that the combination of the biggest word, which is integrity, along with honesty and listening, and lots of different words for listening are up there as well. And I think that possibly reflects the current leadership we have for the country, where all of those characteristics are completely lacking. So it's the thing we're crying out for the most. But also, I think it is about the complexity of the world we live in, and we're talking about how to convey that system change is needed, and how to convey all the different aspects that we want to get done of system change in sound bites is our perennial challenge as the Green Party. And I think being honest about the complexity of the problem that we faced, being having enough integrity to say to people, look, we don't know the answer to this, and we want to listen and see what you think, and maybe we can find a way through together, I think is really important. And we see too much, I think, in leadership around the world at the moment, of this kind of populist, don't listen to anybody, shout out simple slogans, don't admit any weakness kind of leadership, which has failed so badly in the coronavirus crisis. And I think people are crying out for more honesty and more people to say, actually, this is hard, but we want to work on it with you. And I think from our own experiences as co-leaders so far, the thing that we did, where we were approached about the Unite to Remain agreement, which is highly controversial, but the truth was we didn't know whether to proceed and go talk to people. We didn't know whether the party wanted us to do that. And so, we were honest about that, and we put out a question to members, and we genuinely listened, and we asked people to fill in a long, there's a long big text box that said, please tell us in words what you think, not just tick the boxes. And we read those comments back because we were genuinely trying to understand the members. And I think that, to me, was one of the most rewarding things, because we got a huge response to actually asking members what they thought during that process. It was one of the most opened, most replied to, most filled in surveys the party's ever done. And I think people really respond to that. And I'm really pleased to see so many words for listening, and so many words for being honest about this job not being clear cut and easy, no matter what some of the strong men, sorry, this is me and Amelia, are already on a theme around the world are trying to say at the moment.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Sean. And Holly, could I ask you to stop sharing the screen now? Oh, perfect. There we go. That's brilliant. So, but we will save the cloud. Don't worry, the cloud will be saved, and we'll share the cloud, because I think it's an interesting. It'll be interesting for inspiration. Now, before we dive into further conversation, just a little bit of housekeeping to say to everybody. If you have a question, if the conversation stimulates a question you'd like to ask, please use the Q&A function. If you use the chat function, it'll get lost in the course of the evening. So please use the Q&A function, and we try to be as democratic as possible about the questions that do get asked and answered. We're going to have 30 minutes tonight of a Q&A after general conversation. And we ask you to upvote So of course, come up with great questions, but if you see another question that you think is just nailed what it is that you want to say, upvote that question, and the questions that rise to the top in order will be the ones that we will share with the panelists tonight. So Giles, I want to turn to you now. So welcome, Giles. And I'm hoping you can, provoke our thinking a little bit and strike up a little bit of debate maybe tonight. This concept of regenerative leadership, or at least the term, I'm sure it sounds a bit lofty to some people. So I'm wondering if you could explain, at least from your perspective and your work, what's regenerative leadership all about?
Well, it's all really about connection. I mean, I loved the word cloud just now, and courage was in there. I mean, courage, what I love about the word courage is the original meaning, which is courage, to come from the heart. And of course, that heart-based way of leading also encompasses compassion, listening, humility, honesty, openness that Jonathan talked about. And that really is at the heart of what regenerative leadership is all about. It's a reconnection back in from separateness into connecting to our deeper nature and to the nature that is within and all around us. It's quite simple in that regard, yet vitally important for a way of leading that is different from that which created the problems in the first place.
Well, quite. And something about it seems hard, doesn't it? Because it doesn't seem, we talked about, I think Jonathan, Sean, and Amelia all very eloquently talked about integrity, honesty, openness, compassion, and these being sources of strength, not weakness, but at this moment in time, those don't seem to be the qualities that are displayed by a lot of our leaders. And there's something about what feels so natural, and certainly with the people that we trust and care about in our own personal lives, those are the qualities that we look for. What's so hard about leaders sharing those qualities? How did we get to this stage where where we seem to be focused on ego and toughness and competition over integrity, honesty, openness, compassion, vulnerability, empathy, all of these things that everyone has been talking about tonight?
Well, you've packed in quite a nice little snowball of questions in there for me, and that's good, Heather. Thank you for that. I'll be as open and honest as I can be, and vulnerable. What we talk about in the book Regenerative Leadership is that we've been on a journey of separation. It actually has its roots way back in human history, born out of a militarized mind, rising patriarchy, ego explosion, so forth. I'm not going to bore us with now, but suffice to say, over the last few decades, a couple of centuries, it's really accelerated. So this sense of separateness from ourselves, from our own deeper sense of self, from each other and the world around us is now prevalent. So it's quite natural that we would be seeing the effects of that, which really, it comes with deep psychic atrophy, a sense of separateness. Now, there are some benefits. I mean, everything in life has its sort of serves its place. And so this separateness that we've gone on has come with an increasingly mechanistic perspective that can focus in on the parts. Yeah, I mean, some people have related to the left brain hemisphere, to a more focus on the outer, to a more masculine way of attending, so forth. And what that brings with it is, of course, all sorts of advances in modern medicine, technology, and transportation that we all enjoy today. Suffice to say, that way of attending on its own, though, is wholly inadequate to deal with the challenges that we now face going forward. So it's as if we've kind of gone on a journey of separation to see the advantages now of reconnecting. Because, of course, for the vast majority of our human history, 99% of it, we have been in deep sense of connection with nature, with life itself. So it's a reconnection, and we're seeing the beginnings of that. We're seeing the breakdown of an old order, which is a fundamental important part of a breakthrough. So it's challenging to experience breakdown, but it is a natural part of any transformation.
And so I'm wondering if you could try to make this a little bit more practical for people as well.
Yeah.
So what does regenerative leadership look like in terms of just practice and functionality? How might it on a tangible level be a bit different? What are you seeing in organizations?
Well, there's 3 levels that we talk about in the book around the regenerative leadership DNA that you can learn. Essentially, it's all about learning from living systems. It's that shift in consciousness from mechanistic, narrowing down, siloing, into recognizing the interconnections, opening up to more of life. And that shift in consciousness can be applied to 3 levels, essentially, in business. One is around regenerative design. So that's the approach of our products and our places and our processes. The other is around regenerative culture, so to our human cultures and to our psychology and the way that we interrelate. And the other around regenerative being, a way of being, a leadership development approach, if you like. So regenerative design, that's the fascinating area of biomimicry, industrial ecology, circular economics, biophilic design, where we apply insights from living systems to our architecture, to our process design, to the way we make factories, to products and so forth. And there's a lot of good work in that space. We have actually been taking inspiration from nature for hundreds of years, but it started to really gather momentum over the last couple of decades. Now there's the other area, which is how we apply living systems to our cultures, to our organizations and social systems and political parties. Now that's very interesting as well. And that's going through a revolution. So part of that is systems thinking, being able to see the interconnections. Part of that is systemic awareness, where we can actually tune into the system. And this is where compassion, empathy, humility, all of these more feminine qualities, and I don't mean female sexual, I mean a capacity to open up and engage are very important. And so that, as well as an ecosystemic perspective, which is where we see beyond the anthropocentric lens into how life really is, into the interconnectedness of life, allows us to see our organizations and social systems as living systems, complex adaptive systems. And then we can take inspiration from complexity theory, from adult developmental psychology and so forth, to actually look at how we create organizations that are more emergent, more future fit, and not just more agile, but actually more life affirming, actually create the conditions for ourselves and for the services that we provide to actually enhance life. And there's lots of examples in that space. The third area is around living systems being, applying this living systems quality to how we are being in the moment. And there's now lots of good science out there showing how the quality of biophilia, of being in nature, enhances us, enriches our ability for compassion, for empathy, for seeing across boundaries, for noticing our own unconscious bias, our own ways of behaving. So it's a shift in consciousness that actually underpins the other 2 areas, design, culture, and being is the shift in consciousness. So there's lots there I could speak more about. But,
yeah. No, that's a really excellent provocation. And I'm just wondering if maybe on a community level, how you've witnessed communities acting in a bit more regenerative way and communities working together to be leaders.
Yeah, well, there's a few ways. I mean, one is, Jonathan was talking about adversarial politics, and, a lot of debate that we have these days can sort of drift into kind of the us versus them, the polarization, the othering. And you see that in all levels, by the way. You see that just as much in the diversity and inclusion movement as you do in the very thing that it's trying not to other. So that is a natural tendency that we have. It comes from the ego, the desire to separate. And what we're talking about here is the ability to reach beyond, reach over those perceived boundaries of separation, because they are actually illusions that we create in our own mind, to actually have a deeper sense of connection. So something practical could be, for instance, rather than having debates, rather than having panels, rather than having keynote talks, is actually having dialogue. So what I do is I take leaders out into nature. We sit around the campfire. People get out of their normal attire, and quite quickly they are being themselves. They are noticing their own projections, their own armory, and they're loosening into their humanity. And by using a simple practice like way of counsel that Indigenous communities have used for millennia, we can engage in nonviolent communication that enables us to start opening up, trusting. Trust was another word in the cloud. Now we have to create that trust by the way that we're showing up and the way that we're holding space. So quite quickly, I find within a couple of hours, we can get people out of, regardless of how hard-headed a business person or whatever extreme politics they're into, quite quickly you can get them into a space of opening up their humanity, because much of us have these opinionated, polarizing views because we are in some way hurt and we're trying to protect ourselves. And so if we can open that up and allow trust in, then we can start to share and see that the other isn't an enemy, that actually they share some similar views on life than we do.
Thank you so much, Giles. That's really good, stimulating. There was lots in all of that you said that was really stimulating. I'm sure it's making people think and probably have more questions. Maybe some people disagree, but I think it's a really good segue to talk to Jonathan, because Jonathan, what we wanted to talk to you about tonight was collaboration. So Giles talked about polarization in politics, this idea of us versus them. And what's really interesting is, you know, at the same time, you know, the Green Party tends to be one of the most trusted parties. That we're often, polls often show that we're the most trusted party. People believe in what we're saying to them. And, you know, I hear from Chris Williams, you know, one thing that we're just brilliant at is on the doorstep, we listen to people. We take time to develop those relationships and really listen to people, and that's why they trust us. So how does this then translate to when we get elected, when you're a councillor in Lambeth? So this idea of trying to leave us versus them behind, finding ways to build trust and to work on collaboration so that we're representing everybody in a constituency, not just the people who voted for us, and trying to find ways to work together with the thems, the people that disagree with us. How do we find bridges?
So much of what Giles just said is like resonating with me, not just now, but back when I did a lot of work on conflict transformation. You know, one of the fundamental things about peace building is getting past that demonization of the other, and working with, you know, spent some time in the West Bank seeing Palestinian children educating its Jewish children, and you know, when you break down those barriers, there's hope for the future. And we saw it in Northern Ireland, getting past the segregated school system and all the damage that did. But it is a challenge, isn't it? When in elections, it's a competition, you're trying to win. It's an adversarial system. And then when you're elected, you're then having to kind of collaborate and work with your previous opponents, and will be your opponents again in the future. And I think actually London Assembly members so I kind of should defer to Sian, have been brilliant. You know, both Darren and Jenny, Sian and Caroline have been brilliant at working cross-party between elections in a very constructive way, you know, with that kind of function of holding the mayor to account as that kind of scrutiny body. But you know, tangible examples, you know, getting past that demonization of the other. So where I am in Lambeth, I lead the opposition on Lambeth Council, and you know, it was a really bloody election campaign when we got elected. We had our opponents taking stuff. I did an interview on Daily Politics about bins, and Labour picked it up and wrote in all their leaflets that the Greens would drop to every 2-week bin collections, every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they were using this to try and scare local people. You know, your bin collections will be cancelled. All this kind of fake news, and it, you know, it was working on the doorstep. You know, the stuff that kind of wins and loses elections. But we won in my ward, even though they used this stuff. And then you have to start to build bridges with the ruling Labour group. So first of all, we kind of started with, you know, often in conflict situations, you can't always deal directly with the people where relationships are broken down, but you can deal with those around them. So we started to work with the officers in the council, and found we could be very constructive working, put in ideas. So if we put ideas direct into the Labour group, they were going to be rejected because there was this tribalism. But if you feed them in through the officers, they then come to the chief exec or to the cabinet members, and they then adopt them as their ideas. And you get the change that you want to see. So it's kind of subversive. But also, then you can start, you know, as time moves on, depending on the tone that you strike and the lines of communication that you open up and building those relationships, you can get to the point where you're working constructively. So we got, you know, London's first climate emergency motion passed, working with Labour, and got cross-party support. We got the country's, I believe, first reparations motion on reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, which we're hoping will go right across the country by working behind the scenes with Labour and saying, if we come forward, and we actually pioneered a new mechanism. There'd never been a cross-party motion in Lambeth before. And so we went to Democratic Services and we said, you know, can we have provision to do this? Is there provision in the Constitution to do this? We said, we don't know, it hasn't been tried. We ran it through, you know, legal routes, and they said, yeah, that's fine. We did it and brought it forward, and it got passed. And so, you know, it's a risk because you are making yourself vulnerable. You are entering into that relationship of trust. But I think the more progress you make, the more progress there can be in the future, and that's really exciting to me. I wouldn't say that Lambeth is exactly the greatest model. There's still a lot of a lot of opposition that we do, and we're still defending the estates against demolition. We have become the party of the estates in Lambeth, and it's still there are those issues, but there's hope, and I guess it's knowing when to be clever, when to be sensible about it, when to push in this direction, and when to oppose and say no, we can't go any further in that direction as well.
That makes sense, and sure, there's hope if you're able to see progress. And it's a really good segue to what we wanted to chat to Sean about as well. And Sean, building on your comments with the word cloud, talking about having the honesty and the integrity to actually tell people the truth. So if social justice and environmental justice are indivisible, we have to start having conversations about systems change and weaving together policies that talk about all of the interconnected issues, right? It's this getting connected again in terms of what Giles was talking about, but it's hard work, isn't it? So I'm wondering if you could share any insights and some stories from your time at the London Assembly and from your work on the London mayoral campaign trail around how you've succeeded in finding ways to talk to people, getting beyond the silos and starting to have conversations about, all right, guys, everything's interconnected. How can we help people to understand that? And gosh, Sean, I guess it's so tough because we're not asking everybody to be academic scholars here, right? but issues are quite complex. So how do we find that balance?
I think that's a really good question, actually, and I'm not going to tell you my strategy for the London elections because I'm aware there are non-members here and they may be dropping some comments into the chat now and again, so I'm just not going to do that. But I think London's really interesting, and I think how you look at London is really important. It forms the frame, the system that you use as your metaphor for London is really important when you're thinking about what policies to put forwards. And I think too many people think of London like a machine. It's a city you can draw. It's got a tube map that makes it look helpfully mechanistic, and you've got people who look at things like council estates. So Jonathan just gave the example of council estates. They will look down on a map at a council estate and not think of the people and the community and the connections that are in there. They'll see some concrete they don't like the look of. And I think, Labour politicians through the years have been as guilty about this as anybody and called them sink estates or brownfield sites. And they'll take this very, very mechanistic approach to, we'll just knock all that down and we'll build something, and that's our idea, and we've got the vision, and we will lead, and blah blah blah. And they completely forget about the people who already live there, and we can see that in the government's new planning policies as well. So one of the things we've done in London, and I say we as in like Londoners, as well as I've been helping and joining in as a an ally and a political voice for the campaigns, is work with the people on estates and genuinely give them a voice. They're building up their own voices, but also listening to them, magnifying them, making sure that people know that these are communities. They're not just people living in little boxes. They are people who've been living there for 40 years. And you go to visit estates and you meet the really old couples now who moved there when they just got married 45 years ago. And this is in the 70s. So these places have heritage and culture and history, and they get treated so badly by the other parties. And I think our approach to this, and the approach of the people who live there, is this is an interconnected thing. It's a system. It's grown up. It's got its ecology. Quite often has very tall trees after 45 years, as well as real community there. And so breaking that up without a second thought, looking down on it from a map point of view, is just one of the worst things. So I'm really passionate about this. So we've all fought really, really hard to get out of the Mayor of London this policy of having a ballot for any estate where there's any demolition proposed. And it's really interesting, and I can't give away new data that I've analysed and given to one of the newspapers that will print it hopefully soon. But there are signs that now, new schemes coming through, because they're not. I mean, there's only one that's been voted down so far. But the idea is that because residents who live there actually do have the power to make that final decision now, the people putting forward the plans have to bear them in mind, because they're going to have a final say. They have to think about other options, things like refurbishment, things like building on the car park, just the new homes that you need, rather than knocking down everything and starting from scratch. And you are starting to see improvements and things that are coming through, and that was the idea. The idea isn't to have like hundreds and hundreds of no ballots for the equally terrible schemes. The idea is to improve the schemes coming forwards, and I think that really makes a difference. And what happened with all the campaigning and all the stories from the campaigners and the protests and the academic studies that were done to see where the people who lived on the estates that have already been demolished ended up moving to, was building up solidarity between different people. And I think we're really seeing that now. The next phase of sort of housing solidarity has been for the private renters who felt very isolated, who were very atomized, living in all their rented homes with all their different landlords, and now banding together in a union and reaching a point of real solidarity with the people on estates, with the people campaigning in different housing issues. And I think that kind of coming together of people has really changed things, and it's genuinely changed the Mayor of London's policies and attitudes. And I hopefully will shift the whole of politics so that the kind of behaviour we saw before becomes completely unacceptable. The concept of the Overton window, I think, in housing is really shifting in recent years. So I think that's the biggest lesson from the 4 years I've spent so far in the London Assembly. But the plans for London going forward, there's all kinds of exciting things that I don't want to just give away to random.
Don't worry, we're not. that was a really
rich things where we've got solidarity and things that link together and multiple benefits, and real just thinking about the people that are in London, not thinking of it as the tube map.
I think that's just a really rich and beautiful answer to the question. Stories matter because stories are how people express their experiences in life. So it all seems to be going back to connection and just how do we make politics more human? How do we realize that systems aren't things, systems are us and our lives and how we're experiencing it. So moving from London to Wales, hello to Amelia. And I'm wondering if, Amelia, you could take the conversation and push it forward just a little bit. I think the other thing Sean was talking about, and it was building on what Jonathan was talking about, also has to do with power, and realizing that we all have, when we work collectively and collaboratively, that we have power with one another. And what is it that we can do to help to support people's participation in our democracy? How can we help everybody in every community to have a voice in democracy? What have you learned throughout the years? And the local elections are looming, and I'm sure that you're getting ready for them I know that you're getting ready for them in Wales as well.
So I think when I was starting to get involved in politics at university, probably kind of 19 years of age, something changed my way of thinking about politics, and that was the website They Work For You. And it made me think quite differently about how these things operated, that effectively politicians shouldn't be out there for their own agendas, which is how I often felt about how politics worked, but they should be out there making sure that they make a difference for their communities and the people who live in it. I acted quite a lot on that. So my MP at the time, Paul Flynn, did get many letters after I realised that he should be out there working for me. But I think that that's really what should be defining politics, is how we bring it to the grassroots, how we ensure that communities are heard. Obviously, as Greens, we've been talking about citizens' assemblies and have been setting them up in councils across the country, giving an opportunity for many people who don't feel like politics listens to them, who often probably don't feel like their councillors work for them or their MPs work for them, have a say and are listened to. I do think as Greens, we do have the hardest working people across the country. And at a time when I was able to travel the country, I was really inspired about the difference that that made. That inspiration empowers people and gives them agency over what they're able to do in their communities to make that change happen. And I think that's also our job as leaders, to be clear about how we can make change happen. Obviously, ultimately, getting more Greens elected means that we're able to define the policy that sets the agenda, that means that everything from finance to business to the press and everyone operates within a framework that works best for people and planet. But in the meantime, remembering our own power to achieve that is so vital and important. Petitioning, lobbying, getting involved in community activities are all ways that things can build. I use this analogy far too often, but I use it because it empowers me. And that's that feeling of, you remember those 2p machines that you get at amusement arcades that you probably went to as a child or maybe more recently, and you put your 2p in the top and it tumbles down. And maybe you win and maybe you don't, but your small action has shifted that entire machine and means that those big wins can happen in the future. I think from all of those small actions, especially, I mean, at the moment we have a populist PM who changing the tide of public opinion is really important in ensuring that we do get change on the agenda. Not that I think he would influence it, but there are many other things in place as well that I think helps promote engagement. And I want to come back to Giles's point on us versus them. The Welsh Parliament elections are coming up, and as with the London Assembly elections, these are proportional systems, giving more chance for collaboration, but also promotes more diversity. When we have proportional systems, we see more women, more people of colour being elected, because we're not always electing the same institution that we saw before. And I think it's really important and powerful that we reflect on the power of proportional representation to get more diversity. Also, in the next Senedd elections, 16 and 17-year-olds will have the vote. And again, this is such a powerful point, because to me, all of those arguments about why 16 and 17-year-olds should have a vote are powerful and important, but also supporting people into removing the barriers as to why people don't engage is so important as well. An opportunity for schools to register young people to vote. On a number of occasions, I was on doorsteps in the run-up to the EU referendum, speaking to young people who didn't register because they didn't know how. The onus being on schools to provide that support could fundamentally change voting habits and make people feel more engaged in a political process. So I think that this is a time, I really feel at the moment there's a thirst for big ideas, and I think that lots of people don't realise that those big ideas are politics and political change. And I think that at the moment this is such an opportunity to remind people of their own power, bring it back down to communities and make sure people feel listened to. And I am going to do a cheeky adding my crowdfunder to the chat box. If you do want to support the South Wales East campaign, do donate, because it's the best way we can get our message out there. Apologies, Heather.
Don't have to apologize. And it's a great reminder. It's just so exciting that 16 and 17-year-olds are going to have the vote in Wales. I hope it is an inspiration. I hope it's an inspiration for more to come. And this idea of hope being an action and inspiration plus agency plus aspiration also seems to be a bit of a running theme through our conversation tonight. And one last question to Giles, actually, before we turn it over to the Q&A in the audience. I'm just curious, as you work with leaders all the time, are there some themes that you recognized in terms of what Jonathan, Sean, and Amelia were saying that seem innovative to you in terms of new practices and new styles of leadership that are really going to bring about this systems change that we need so desperately?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I really enjoyed listening to the three there. There's a lot of freshness there. Sean, around London, I used to live in London for many a year, and we talk about in the book social acupuncture, how we can use the holistic approach of unlocking energy and engaging local buy-in and empowerment There's a Brazilian city mayor. I'll give you the information separately, because just in case, as you say, you don't want everyone knowing about it. But there's some really useful information that is tested and is now being used in New York as well, which is a very powerful way to engage, to unlock energy and empower people at the local level within cities using a holistic approach. So really fascinated by what you were sharing about in London. Amelia, empowering at the local level is totally, you know, what it's all about, as you say. And I think proportional systems are a very sensible way forward. And your point around diversity, if we look at nature, if we look at living systems, it's those diverse systems that are the ones that are most able to adapt to change and are most resilient and most future fit. And what's interesting about the phrase diversity and inclusion is how they have slightly different dynamics in them, and yet they go well together. So diversity is that divergence, is that opening up. Too much of that, and actually things can become kind of chaotic, and that's where convergence or inclusivity comes in, which is how do we align, how do we provide coherence? And that's where a sense of purpose, a very clear sense of purpose that people can rally around, which still allows for divergence, allows for diversity, is really important. So how do we encourage, through a sense of purpose, which I believe the Greens have in bucket loads, allow that diverse voice to come through, which is really important. So yeah, just really enjoyed listening to you all. I don't know what else to add other than really this is just about opening up to our heart, opening up to our true nature. And now is the time, I think, for the Greens to cross the threshold into really, you know, breaking through into mainstream party politics.
Indeed. Okay, and with that, let's turn it over to the audience. I'm going to open up the Q&A box. All right, and Jonathan, Sean, and Amelia, I know you well. I'm not going to call on any of you in particular. I'm just going to be counting on you to jump in because I know that you'll have lots of things to say ASAP. So the first question is from Claudia Fisher. How can the Green Party become more effective at holding the government to account for its failure to act urgently around the climate and ecological emergency? Who wants to go? Jonathan, I think you're the first one that jumped in there.
I mean, it's pretty clear from this government that they don't really, you know, with their big majority now, you know, got under 50% of the vote, but they've got a massive majority comparatively. We saw this, and they can break international law, and their backbenchers will go through the lobbies dutifully. So it's really hard to hold them to account within Parliament. You know, we don't have a functioning democracy. So I think, you know, it's important to recognise that. So, you know, where has the change come? Where have the U-turns come? Over the algorithm, over free school meals. You know, it's come from large movements of people, young people, footballers, you know, whoever it is. And you're getting more and more people coming forward, like Gary Lineker as well, you know, coming forward over refugees and migrants. I think we've got to work with these mass membership movements and be the political expression of those movements, and recognize the interconnectedness of all these issues together, because we're all after system change. We're all after fundamental change of the way things work. And you know, we've always said with our Green New Deal during the general election that we needed a basic income in order to support everyone through the huge changes that we've got to make to transition to very rapidly to net zero economy. And so, you know, welfare was fundamentally part of our Green New Deal, and all these issues are interconnected. And so let's build that movement, let's build those allies, let's point out that if we're going to deal with the climate, you know, get climate justice, we need to look at reparations for the global south, you know, who are responsible for a very small proportion of the emissions, but will pay 95% of the price. You know, that there is a climate and ecological emergency, you know, has come out very strongly with the Nature report over the last week or so. So I think, you know, the answer in terms of accountability is for the Green Party to be that political expression of the movement, and we need to be showing that leadership, you know, to unite that movement together. So last thing, when I worked in the House of Commons in the 90s, and apologies to people who've heard me say this before, but my hero was Tony Benn. And when he retired, he said, I'm leaving the House of Commons to concentrate on politics. I'm leaving the House of Commons to concentrate on politics. And it's his conviction that it is these movements that really change things. After 50 years in Parliament, he recognized that a real change comes from these movements, but you need that political expression to make these movements have their impact. And so that's the space that I think we should occupy and step up right now to do.
Yeah, and demonstrate the interconnectedness, as you're saying. Yes. Amelia or Sean, is there anything that you wanted to add? Go for it, Sean. Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I mean, going back to what Amelia was saying earlier about, you know, writing to her MP on a repeated basis when she was very young. You know, we are. I'm an elected politician, and Jonathan is as well. We have these. We're on. They work for you. People write to us, and also as co-leaders and the leadership team for the Green Party, a lot of people within the party who want to raise an issue will come straight to us and they will say, "Here's what I think." And I think that's, you know, you have to remember that politicians are people. And so other people getting in touch with personal messages and saying, here is what I think. And I would like you to do something is really, really important. And I think that's where the youth climate movement really started out. I mean, Greta wasn't necessarily doing a protest there. She was just like trying to make a particular, she was outside the parliament, wanting to get the attention of the parliamentarians. And that kind of personal connection is really, really important. So I think we have to look at the volume of the amount of holding to account we do when they fail, but also the quality of it, and make sure that we are making sure they know that we're people, because we know because they're people, they'll react more in a more sort of open way. They're more likely to listen to people that they can relate to. So not be a mob, but be a band of individuals who they have some recognition with. And I think there is more we can do. And I think the celebrity thing, which someone's mentioned in the chat and Jonathan mentioned too, is, I mean, the thing about celebrities is, you know, we see so much of them because they're on the telly and that we do relate to them, so we think of them as people, so they are very influential for that reason. Whereas, you know, Twitter user John 4321311 saying that's a load of rubbish, Sean, doesn't influence me as much.
That makes perfect sense. It's funny, I remember Hillary Rodham Clinton saying in an interview once that she really, in the age of iPhones, she really misses getting letters and postcards from people because nowadays, and people just reaching out to her at rallies, shaking her hand and telling her about a story about their lives. Whereas nowadays they tend to just want her to stand with them and take a selfie, or they send her an email, and it's not the same. You don't get the same sort of personal connection. So.
One of the good things about this job is meeting people, and it doesn't mean the quality of the interactions is important.
Yeah. I think, why don't we move on? So democracy as a whole has been a conversation that we've had throughout the evening. And Amelia, since you were talking about democracy, I'm gonna put Johnny Griffith's question to you. So an element of how we fix our democracy, how do we get Labour to support proportional representation?
I just want to reflect on what Sian said about Greta. Greta alone wouldn't have changed things. It's the people behind her, that the volume, the kind of the inspiration that she creates that is helping create climate emergencies around the world, has inspired our Green Councillor Carla Denyer to put climate emergency in place in Bristol. And obviously we need to provide scrutiny to act on that now. And I think that kind of in terms of democracy, sorry, could you repeat the question? I was just...
Well, the question was framed as, how do we get Labour to support proportional representation?
So to get that change, we need to remember once again our own power of, as I said before, signing petitions, getting involved in lobbying, and being those small 2 pences that shift the entire machine. But fundamentally, as Greens, we've been there from the very beginning talking about proportional representation. And I think it's really fundamental that we frame it from a point of, in this country, we talk about one person and one vote. But actually, the reality is that one person's vote is worth more than another's. it's like a postcode lottery of opportunity for people, a postcode lottery of people having their say. And often it becomes the postcode lottery about who gets more from their MP, depending on if they are in, if they've got a big majority or not. I feel being in South Wales, we've never felt like a priority because it's Labour win after Labour win. And those aren't always the constituencies that feel like they're prioritised because it's almost a done deal before anyone got to the ballot box. I think it's important that we do highlight this from a real point about what voting should mean. If you look across Europe, the only other country that doesn't have some form of proportional system, I admit that others aren't proportional as others, is the Vatican. I mean, being less democratic than the Vatican, being slightly more democratic than the Vatican isn't a good thing for our country. And I think we really need to bring it down to while we talk to Labour about what the reality is for people and how people feel less empowered because they don't feel like their vote does anything, because for so many people, actually their vote hasn't done something. And I think this is a real point of communication to ensure, because these are values that Labour should be supporting first and foremost. It should be core to their identity, yet they're failing to give that to people and failing to support it. So yeah, once again, remembering our own power of how we make political change, remembering that there are strong alternatives out there that mean that we will have a better form of politics, but also making sure that we use these key fundamental points of leadership actually that we talked about at the beginning to ensure that we're communicating in that a way that really the Labour Party are failing themselves right now and their values by not getting involved.
Thanks, Amelia. And I think I'm going to move on to Kevin Priest's question because I want to try to get through as many questions as possible. I think it's somewhat connected because we're talking about collaboration, communication, not just top down, but also how do we make bottom up change and get our messages out there. With that in mind, what Kevin is asking is the party has little coverage in mainstream media. Until this changes, the party is unlikely to be seen as a niche, or is likely to be seen as a niche party. How can coverage be increased to improve the profile of the party? What is your response to the question and maybe even the framing of the question?
So I go.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are a number of ways of answering this. I mean, number one is we have one press officer for the entire party, one press officer for the leadership, one press officer for the spokespeople, and anything else that we do. We've got to scale up. When you look at, compared to the Lib Dems, who will have, I know Nick Clegg at one point personally had, I think Kath in Caroline's office tells me, 20 press officers just for Nick Clegg at one point, back in 2010 when they were, riding up there. Getting media requires pitching and pitching and pitching. It requires coming up with angles. It requires putting in freedom of information requests to generate news and to generate stories. I know we had a big push in 2015 when we were excluded from the leaders' debates, but I don't think if we just carry on moaning about it and don't actually put in a strategy to make it happen, we aren't going to get anywhere. And I think the party needs to face up to this, and it will come as no shock. It's not the choice of the leaders about where resources goes. It's the choice of the Green Party executive about where resources to set the budget. But we have put in place and pushed to get a strategy to increase and diversify our funding stream. So it isn't just from our members, and that's going well. Our membership is increasing, still increasing on the back of this leadership election, which is brilliant. And so we are getting more money in, but we also need to diversify our funding stream, which we're trying to do in order to get the resource, so we can employ the press officers, so we can generate the coverage, so we can attract more members, so we can get more money, so we can employ more press officers, and so on. You can see we need to get that momentum going. And I also think we need to be looking more widely at how we communicate. So not just looking at the broadcast media and print media, looking far more widely. Sian can talk about her Stopping with Sian kind of channel, which she's been doing. There are collaborative things that we can do, and we're trying to push that forward. I know with you, Heather, about working with influencers, with bloggers, using various social media, pooling resources, collaborating, and I think that's an important part of who we are as Green Party, collaborating, spreading the net wider, so we share with their audience, they share with our audience, and together we grow. and getting cut through that way. We could talk about this all night.
I am sure we could do, indeed. Sean, I did see your hand go up too, and I think Amelia might want to comment on this question as well. I'm going to go with Sean first.
Yeah, I think Jonathan makes a good point. I mean, there is a sense in which we don't get our fair share of the slots in the big broadcast media. The BBC does have like a formula for working this out, and sometimes we go over it, and we're a main party, sorry, is what I mean to say. And in London, we are a main party now. So when we get when they go beyond the big two, we're one of the people they always come to. We're always included in debates and things like that within London because of the record, because of PR. You know, these things do mushroom. But I think Jonathan makes a really good point about the resources needed to turn the amazing stories that are all around the country, the amazing successes that the Greens are doing. We are not short of material and good stories. What we are short of is people to tell those stories. And it's not, you know, you can't just imagine something. It's really difficult. People often look at something and go, here's something good that happened. Can we do a press release? And they don't realise that we haven't got the resources to turn every single little thing that happens into a press release, which is then followed up with phone calls and then the graphics and then put out, you know, there's a certain limit to what we can do with the resources that we have. So all of you should give us more money right now. Extra press officers, essentially. But also, I mean, the party makes its choices about where to put its resources. But I think, you know, by and large, we do that intelligently, and we're doing the best we can in terms of staffing. And so, yeah, basically, we just need more people telling the stories of what we're doing, because there's so much good material out there.
Thanks, Sean. Amelia, what did you want to add?
I wouldn't actually added this to the chat, but I was going to say this is also the power of bringing things down to the local. And I know that we've got incredible local press officers out there who volunteer and get stories in their local papers, ensuring that their communities are represented and making sure that we are getting that kind of clear scrutiny actually of councils out there, scrutinising those in power and the opposition at every opportunity. But also as a party, we get the most votes to the pound. And we get what we do with our money has a big impact. And I think that another phrase that was brought up in that word cloud was imagination. And from the detoxifying Dettol that you might have seen the other week, where we took a Dettol advert and actually talked about our values about a 4-day week and how we see the future of work, to even things like the Grown Up Politics video back in 2016. I think we have used imagination, used our resources well to make sure that we are getting our message out there in a way that's accessible, meaningful to people, and ensures that we're doing that using the platforms we have. But that doesn't take away from the need to be in the press and media to ensure that we're operating outside of our own bubbles. But I feel really proud when we do break out in that way with imagination, with a little bit of cheekiness, with a kind of bringing something different to the political table. And yeah, I think it's really powerful what we are able to do with our small amount of resources. I did see that another funding link went in to the chat, but it is so powerful. We're not funded in the same way as other political parties. We are funded by people like you, and that's why we don't have the vested interests of other political parties at our heart. We have you, our members and supporters and voters and activists at our heart, and that's really a way that we should all be doing politics.
There's true power in that. And, you know, if there's a way that these positive deviant stories that are happening at the local level can also be shared, as you said, by people at the local level, maybe the people close to those stories, then it becomes something less about a kind of political orchestrated piece, and it becomes about real movement. Back to Jonathan's point about real movement. I'm not saying we don't, of course, need to be investing in PR. Of course we do. But it's also balancing that local and recognizing that your real power is that you're different from the other political parties, and that's a good asset.
One more thing, because there are, you know, this is great, but there's if someone was there like looking around at all the local stories, you would see themes and it emerging. And so the best thing we've done in terms of communicating our power is the stories about the climate emergency motions, you know, the fact that this grew from Carla in Bristol and became something that's now in, I think, over 250 councils. It's been inspiring to people of all parties, and they've all got involved. That's a really good story, and we told it in one of our broadcasts. So we do get access to Channel 4 every so often to make a little film, and we made a little film about Carla's story because it was such a good story, but it was also the story about all the other places as well, and there's more we can do of that, but all of this takes time and effort and staff. Quite honestly, can't expect everyone to do this as a volunteer, although it's great.
Okay, thanks, Sean. I'm going to go into the next question. We have a new member who is posing this question, Peter Cox. Welcome, Peter Cox. Thanks for joining the Green Party. Peter is concerned because he read that only 16% of the membership voted in the recent elections. So he's wondering what your opinion is on that. And then also, he's got 2 points in his question. So he's also, as a new member, wondering, are we credible? Are we going to viably get elected? And how do we worry about not splitting the vote? Sean, go for it. You put your hand up, so.
Yeah, I want to know the answer to the first part of that question too, quite honestly. I really thought we had such a good, strong challenge, particularly from Rosie, I thought, in the elections. And, you know, this is a point of real decisions. And I just thought people would feel like they wanted to have their say in this election, and I really am surprised that the turnout was so low. And I think we could all, you know, I'd love to do like a bit of a poll on the chat, but I'm not going to ask people what they think the reasons for this are. What I really want to do is find the members who didn't vote and find out why, because there could be lots of different reasons for that. And I would really like to do a survey. And I know that by definition, it's really hard to reach people who didn't do something to get them to do something quite similar, i.e. fill in a survey. But I think there's, you know, we do get about, you know, about 1/3 of our emails are read, and we got a very good response, like I said before, to that question about Unite to Remain, where we wanted the members to tell us something we didn't know, and this is the same situation. So I'd really like to try and induce some of those members who didn't vote in the elections to tell us why that was, because we can all try and make that up, but I can't explain it at the moment, and I would really like to know what specifically it was, because we can then go set about fixing each of those things. So that.
Just to add to that, we have asked, we're asking the chair of GPEX to look at it, to look at the best way of getting that information. And it's hard because members were emailed about it. So you don't want to just do the same method to find out, you know, kind of, you want to try and bypass that and get to the people who didn't vote and say, why didn't you? But we're keen to get to the bottom of that. I think what's also important to know, I think this is a long-term problem. Yes, turnout was down on the last election, but our turnout in leadership elections is always much less than the other parties. So the Lib Dems were hitting 50% odd, I think, in their leadership election, and you know, and ours, I think, off the back of my head, it's 20%, 23%, 24% in the last 2 leadership elections. So it's significantly always down. Part of the reason is, I think, you know, we can speculate, might be, you only have a very strict spending limit on what you can spend on the campaign. We don't get the same national coverage. So if you think of the Lib Dem leadership election, they're playing out their leadership election in the national press. But that isn't happening with the Green Party election because we're not capturing the imagination. So, you know, often the best way to get messages out to Green Party members is not actually to email them, it's to get a story in the national press. And they pick it up that way. And we've often found that narratives, you know, comms strategies, when we use phrases in the national press, they get picked up by local parties. If we send them to local parties, they never get used. So it's actually dealing with that in a public debate. But this is just speculation. And as Sean says, we need evidence-based strategy. But, you know, also might be that we have leadership elections every 2 years. So it's not generating the same kind of, oh, they ditched their leader, there was a coup. You know, that same kind of soap opera politics that you get played out in different parties where you know, there's that intrigue. And so you get those bites in the press. We don't do it that way. It's a set thing. But we need to get to the bottom of it and we've asked GPEX to look at it.
Thank you, Jonathan. with respect to time, I think I'm going to move on to Nick Hartley's question. So we've got about 5 minutes left in our evening tonight. So Nick Hartley has asked, so Nick Hartley works for the NHS, and he says, I see more and more how open and compassionate leadership is appreciated by staff and patients, and it improves outcomes. In politics, people continue to be attracted to those who seem decisive and strong, qualities which often looks divisive and autocratic to green eyes. How can we show compassion in a way that voters will see as a strength? Pregnant pause.
I was leaving that to Amelia.
Ah.
I've thought too much. Someone else needs to talk.
And Giles might have a word or two to say as well. But
vulnerability. I mean, Jonathan's already kind of touched on this straight off when he shared having that that level of connection with people. When you truly connect with people, is when you're being human rather than in presentation mode. You're actually connecting with them. That's a different kind of energy. People sense that consciously or unconsciously. They open up. So, you know, it would be lovely to have dialogue around the fire. I appreciate what you're having to deal with is sound bites and competitive environments, but it's a way that one can ease out of that and not be kind of trumped up into the fear, but actually drop down into the love, into the heart, then that can be very powerful.
Thanks, Giles. Thank you, Giles. Amelia, what would you like to say?
I feel like there's a lot that we need to do to disrupt the system, really, because the fact that things like that are valued or prioritized, that isn't something that isn't about compassion, means that we effectively aren't getting the best people for the job. But also people don't put themselves forward for the job either, because I guess you can't be it unless you see it. And those people who embody compassion in the work that they do with grassroots movements and campaigns don't always see themselves as politicians, even though they have those fundamental qualities to make that change happen and be a representative, because they don't see that in politics. I think that we've all got to, I think this is why it's really important that we do encourage more diverse people to stand, so that we have better leadership, better representation, making sure that people see people like them in politics and that things can be done quite differently. I would reflect that I don't think Parliament is a good way to have that kind of democracy with Her Majesty's government, Her Majesty's opposition, with a sword's length in between to make sure that they don't fight in Parliament. I think when BBC Parliament was set up, it was about transparency and trying to engage people, whereas I find that people do find it more alienating because they see people talking in a way that doesn't relate to their day-to-day lives. And I think it's really important that that is disrupted with clear democratic reform across the boards, whether that's proportional representation or a proper elected second chamber. And I think that this representation is powerful. I think speaking about issues with compassion is powerful, and speaking about things in a different way is powerful. I feel that that's been something that I've really always valued, working with local parties and going to events across the country. And as Giles said, sometimes that one-on-one kind of more personal experience gets that stronger interaction. But I think change happens with representation and change happens with leadership. And I think, it's a tough kind of situation to break, but we're seeing that kind of, I think also with the first past the post, obviously you've got to be a winner to get through. And I think there's possibly a difference between how you win an election versus how you govern and support a community. And we don't always maybe talk about that in terms of how that can actively harm politics, about what we see as a winning trait versus how we see governance and the people we want to represent us. But yeah, big challenges ahead. But I think it boils down to clear leadership, and all of you who are there thinking about your powers as a leader. Should you be a candidate? Should you be putting yourself forward for our internal elections? Should you be our next parliamentary candidate, our next councillor? Like, I really believe in all of you. And I believe that when we have people who don't always see themselves as politicians, I didn't see myself as a politician, I feel like an accidental politician, that is how we change that kind of, that way that politics often gets represented.
Thanks so much, Amelia. It's 7:15, but do I have you all for maybe just 5 more minutes to wrap up?
We've got Carly going absolutely mad.
And we've got, and Carly Brown has
be tackled in 1 minute. But we are, I just want to, can we advertise the conference session that we will be doing?
We will be doing that before we wrap up. We absolutely will.
A much longer period of conference for all of this. It's really important.
Absolutely, we are, that's in the chat. We'll be mentioning it before we wrap up tonight, and everybody will get an email on the other side of this event as well to let them know where we can carry on the conversation. But let's just, Carly's got a really rich question, and so let's just address this question. It seems like a nice one to end the evening on. So Sean mentioned earlier while discussing the word cloud that listening and working together is something that's important in a political climate which is very populist. What do the leaders think about how this also shows up in the left? And how can we be a party that is truly different to allow these sorts of difficult but extremely important conversations to happen? Jonathan, yes.
Yeah, it's always a temptation, isn't it, to embrace populism? And I found that in the leadership election, there were still people within our party saying, we just need that populist leader. We just need that person that's going to appeal. We just need that kind of Nigel Farage of the left. And then everything's going to be sorted. You know, that's not how we operate. Those aren't our values as a party. We want to create a team. We want to be a movement. We want lots of faces, a diverse, inclusive movement with lots of people who are recognised, who are authentically rooted in their local communities. So I was knocking on the door in the council elections, I don't know, 2016, knocked on the door, and this lady, I guess must be in her 80s, answered the door and said, "Ugh, politicians." And we said, "Okay, I'm sorry, you know, what's the issue here? You know, why? Why did you say that?" She said, "Well, politicians killed my family." And we went, "What do you mean?" She said, "I'm from Eastern Europe. Politicians killed my uncle and my father." And we said, "Well, you know, we just absolutely gobsmacked. There's nothing we could say." And so she said, what can we do for you?" And so she took us out the back and she showed us a rose garden. And she said, "I've always been into nature. I lived in Streatham for 20 years and I've always wanted just a few trees outside my house. Could you go and get some trees?" So 6 months later, we got her trees put in. Come election day, in her 80s, she had joined the party. She had got a box of leaflets. She was out at Streatham Hill Station giving out the leaflets. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. And of course she was voting, never having voted in her life. I hear stories like that up and down the country, and I could give you half a dozen stories from my own community, and I'm sure people here who are members of the party could give half a dozen stories like that. We need an authentic politics, and I think we need to resist that populism. It's short-termism. It's not what we're about. But overcoming the tribalism is really important as well, and that's the second part of the question. And I think there is a cost to leadership, and it's about being vulnerable. It's about seeing the greater good. It's about seeing the common good. And there is a cost to reaching out to other parties, as we have seen in the last 2 general elections. There is a cost to saying there is a greater good, that there is a greater issue, the climate and ecological emergency, tackling austerity. And that's why these decisions are made at the local level about whether we field candidates or not, and whether we reach out or not. And I absolutely stand by that. But we have to recognise there is a cost to it. We are made vulnerable in that, and there is potential electoral impact. And therefore, we need to make these decisions together, collectively. So the answer to your question about tribalism is that we need to have better democracy within the party, even more than we have already. We need to come together and make these decisions collectively, and then not criticise and tear the party apart when things don't always go the way that we hope they would. We stand together, we stand by the values, we stand in solidarity, and that is the way I think that we will make progress and show authority and real leadership.
Amelia.
Just fantastic answer, Jonathan. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think that Jonathan mentioned before about his love of Tony Benn. I feel the same, and that phrase of be a signpost and not a weather vane. I think that leadership is about being a signpost and not swaying to popular opinion. Because fundamentally, as Greens, we will always be that signpost because we work on an evidence base. And frankly, science doesn't care about popular feeling. And I think that popular opinion. And I think that as leadership, what we need to do is to be actively communicating our unique positions, which galvanizes people in so many different ways. There's actually this scientific experiment that puts people in a room, and the person's asked to say which line's longer, line A or line B. And actually only one person's being experimented on. The other 14 people are just there as part of the experiment. And the first person says that line A is longer than line B. And this person at the end is like, that idiot, you know, how could he possibly see that? There must be, it must be his fault. But then the second and the third and the fourth person says line A is longer than line B. And you've probably guessed, it comes round to this person sat at the end and they say line A is longer than line B because they're thinking, it must be me, I must be misunderstanding something. It must be something to do with me if everybody else has said it. It just takes one person saying the correct answer for that person at the end to be saying that. And I feel that's who we are as Greens. We're that person in the room that isn't just saying things because it's what everybody else is saying. We're saying things because we know that our message will galvanize people because we have that evidence base behind it, and we're speaking out for people that aren't always represented. And I think that's sometimes that I think that's so valuable and important, and a tradition that we've held throughout our history. And yeah, I think we all need to be that person in the room that speaks out, tells the truth, makes sure that we are getting that message out there, and it's not about what everybody else is saying.
Thank you so much, Amelia. So I think we like to finish all of these evenings on a note about hope and what gives us all hope. And I think you've expressed that really well, and to find the hope in having the courage to be a signpost and not a weather vane. I want to thank everybody, Jonathan, Sean, Amelia, and of course Giles, for joining us this evening, and for sticking with us 5 minutes over time as well, so we could get to that last question from Carly. A reminder to all of you who are members that conference starts on the 2nd of October, and there are more communications that will be going out about when you can hear Jonathan, Sean, and Amelia speaking, and also have more conversations with them about the Green Party during conference. And before I switch off completely, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Holly. Holly, are you still there? Holly is going to take the screen, and Holly is going to tell you about the event that we have coming up next Wednesday.
Yeah, so for next week's conversation, we've invited Finian Makepeace, who's from the agroecological regenerative farming movement called Kiss the Ground, and they have a documentary on regenerative farming coming out. Regenerative farming is part of our policy, so it's a really great opportunity to learn about the power of soil regeneration and all the solutions that it offers. So it's coming out on Netflix on the 22nd of September. Julie's going to share a trailer for you if you want to take a look. And then on the 23rd, which is next Wednesday at 6, we will have Finian Makepeace, and then we'll have our green peer, Natalie Bennett. We'll have 2 farmers, one from Wales and one from England, Joyoti Fernandez and Sam Robinson. Both of them are part of the Land Workers Alliance as well. And they'll be sharing how rewilding, regenerative farming, reforestation, all these parts of Green Party policy are huge pieces of hope for the future. So when we exit out of this, you'll be welcomed onto the sign up page. And Julie's also going to share it in the chat. So yeah, we hope to see you there.
Well, thank you so much, Holly, for what's coming next, and hope to see some of you at conference. And good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.